Hi, my name is Marnie Maciborski. I am in the Associate Trainers program with Art2Ride. This is my 13-year-old Andalusian gelding Charlie. I started Charlie in this training method in spring of this year, 2006. So he's had about 9 months of work. What you'll see is pretty typical training session with me today. I usually start out with a little work in hand. If not work in hand, then I'll definitely lunge Charlie first. I find he does much better under saddle once he has the opportunity to warm up without me on his back. My sessions usually last between 20 and 30 minutes. As you can see, I start off with him in more of a smaller circle with me at his shoulder, where I'm focusing on getting that inside hind to step up under towards the center of his belly. I don't spend too much time just walking in straight lines, worrying solely on his head and neck, because focusing on that inside hind is what's really going to get him to come through his back, and that will facilitate the position of his head and neck to stretch. I definitely need to use my hand in a more upwards manner when he brings his head up. I have to be careful not to pull backwards on the bars of his mouth, but to raise my hand so the bit stays in the corner of his lips. I like to think of it as making him smile with upwards tension rather than frowning with my hands low or backwards tension. There goes into a leg yield, which is okay. I'd like to see him more stretched out. He comes up a little too high above the withers, so I just let him back out on a straight line and get him stretched out again. You'll see as we go, he'll get deeper in his stretch, and by the end of our lunge work, he's working nicely over his back. Another leg yield there. I keep his right shoulder leading, although there's a little crossover. You can see he is stepping under his belly. So he's still developing his lateral work, which will become easier and easier as he gets stronger with his longitudinal bend. There he gets nice and deep there. Here we're going to come down and a little shoulder in once we get to the long side. He starts into it nice and he struggles a little bit. I'd want to see him in a deeper stretch and more fluid. You can see he loses it when his head and neck come up, so I just encourage a little bit more, see if we can fix it. And then I'll let him back out, reestablish our walk and our stretch. I like to use the different color polos on his diagonal pairs because I think it helps to train my eye to see his rhythm better, especially on the lunge. I think it works well when watching it on video in hand work, so you can see where the legs fall better in the lateral work. Starting to the right now, Charlie had an issue with wanting to abduct that right hind away from his body. So I pay special attention to getting his hindquarters to the outside of the circle. Especially in this direction and him stepping under his body. There again, I should be bringing my hand up higher towards the sky and following his head and neck up. When I started training Charlie, he used to drag his left toe and abduct the right. And all of that was really just a weakness through his top line. He wasn't able to really lift his hind end and carry himself properly, which just through being patient and letting him get stronger, that all fixed itself. He no longer drags his toes. Like I said, I still have to pay attention to that right hind a little bit more, but he's getting much better. There's a good deep stretch with his nose out and forward. That looks good there. Here we start our lunge work. I start him off with him very close to me, almost like our in-hand work, just to reiterate that I want him to be stepping under himself. Then I'll slowly let him out into a bigger circle. However, I do keep him rather close to me, even on the lunge, but I walk a lot more, so he has the comfort of a larger circle, but I have more control being closer to him, which does take the handler, I think, a certain amount of fitness to be able to do that. There's a lot of workout involved in lunging, and especially with Charlie, the more energy I possess and present to him, the more energy he gives me. When I'm just standing in the middle and making him go around me, he doesn't respond very well to that. So when I encourage him to give me more activity, I take the end of my whip and aim for where his hind quarter and leg meet, the back part of the gaskin there, where the fleshy part above his hocks. By aiming at that point, I get more activity, and it also pushes his hindquarters to the outside of the circle, so I get more of a shoulder 4. And when his head and neck come up, I just close my hand on the lunge line and aim for that spot with my whip. Here we go into a trot. He starts out obviously a little unbalanced, a little hollow. He's trying to find his circle, his rhythm. But once he finds it, you'll see how much steadier he'll become. When I first started lunging Charlie, I used the rail as kind of a buffer for him. But now I would prefer to lunge him in the middle of the ring so he doesn't use that fence as kind of a magnet. But starting horses that aren't very familiar with the lunge, I'll use the fence corner to kind of help them find their balance on the circle. Charlie doesn't need that any longer, and I prefer him to find his own balance without using anything to help him. So I'll keep him off the rail in the center of the ring. With Charlie, I never used a shambone or anything side reins. I haven't used on him. It's always just been with my hands, the reins, the lunge line. I like to, with him, I clip the lunge line right to the ring of the bit. I don't put it over his pole. I just find that it works best for him. You'll see he does start to get a little more consistent as we go. That's better there. Lunging is one of my favorite training techniques. You can see the progression physically and mentally in the horses so well when it's done properly. Some of the things I look for while I'm scanning their bodies back and forth is if their tail is gently bouncing from left to right and slightly away from their body, which would mean that their hips are swinging from left to right, which will hopefully come up and through their back, and you'll see their back swinging from left to right. I ask, is he stepping under with his belly, stepping under his belly with his hind legs? I like to use the point of the buttock as a reference point and observe if the hocks are coming too far behind that reference point, or are the hocks spending more time in front of that point? Meaning, is he stepping under himself well enough, or is he strung out behind him? Are the hocks moving in a circular motion, or are they moving in a more stiff horizontal motion? Is he able to bend the hocks enough that he can thrust off the ground and propel his quarters up? Is he tracking up? Is the hind foot stepping in the print of his front foot that just left the ground? Is it in front of that spot or behind that print? Charlie's finally developing some abdominal muscles. It's cool to see when they develop, you can start to see an indentation along their stomach. I also look to see if his feet are traveling on the same plane, meaning are his front feet and hind feet at the same level when they leave the ground. Charlie had an issue with throwing his front feet high and way out in front of him, and his hind feet would literally be dragging on the ground, so they were definitely not on the same plane. I also like to look at the angle of his front legs and hind legs make. I call them they look like the V shapes he's creating with his legs. Does the front V match the hind V? How small or large is the angle when both legs on one side meet? If it's very large, then your horse is probably not tracking up. And I think this is where I like to use the different color polo wraps. I think it makes it easier to see. And of course, the head and neck position. The lower he's able to get, the deeper he should be able to step up under his belly. Always looking at if the nose is poked out in front of the vertical or is it curled back. Charlie did have that problem of curling back behind the vertical anytime I would take any kind of contact with him. He'd just want to break over and bring his nose to his chest. So that's been something that we've been battling from the beginning. But he is getting better with it. And here we go to the right. I just reiterate that I want him to step up under his belly, so I start close and slowly let him out. There he kind of loses his focus, so I just squeeze the line and send him forward. And there he goes into contact. I'm also looking to see how his strides are. Are they long and ground covering or short and choppy? He's come a long way with that. He used to kind of just stab the ground with his legs and pull himself forward. Didn't have any real rhythm or flow to his trot. It just looked so disengaged. So again, work in progress. So pick up the trot. Starting out in this direction, again, he's just trying to find his balance on the circle. I think he's got good activity though. Better stretch there. So all in all, I'd like him to be able to stay in a much deeper stretch for longer and more consistently. He'll get there. He still has a ways to go with developing his top line and strength. So I just have to be patient. There's nice there. And that's better. When he puts his head up like that, I just squeeze my lunge line hand and send him forward, then release, and he comes right back down. I get him into the canter, which is much better this way than the other way. That's something that we still are working on. I don't do a lot of it. You can see he still has difficulties stretching in this gait. So we'll do that for a circle or two and then come back down to the trot. We just build on it every time I have him out. And you can see that that canter did help him. Got him into a little bit of a deeper stretch. Although that's good there. Then we go into our mounted work. Here's a clip of last year in 2015, before I started any kind of work with Charlie. You can see how overdeveloped his whole underside is. He's got huge neck muscles underneath, very ewe-necked from just pulling himself with his neck and his front end rather than using his hind end. His entire top line looks much shorter than his underside does. His neck is into his shoulders. He's very dipped behind the saddle. So you can see the difference in him now that just those 9 months did for him. He's stretching nice there. Again, I have to be more cautious of lifting my hands up higher instead of back, especially since he has that history of curling back. So you can see he comes behind the vertical a little bit. So when he does that, I just send him forward. Ask for a little more activity to help push his back up and his neck and nose out. Go into a leg yield. Again, not much crossover, but just having him move off my leg is progress. Especially tracking right. He did like to bulge to the right. He'd rather push into my leg than yield to it. So he's getting much better with that direction. You'll see, I don't know if he does it there. You'll see he starts to lift his knees up really high once in a while in this portion of the video. I had taught him, there he goes, I had taught him to Spanish walk a while ago. So he'll occasionally have these little Spanish fits. He doesn't do it all that often, but of course I had the camera rolling, so I guess he had to show off a little bit. But when he does do it, I just send him into a lateral movement, and that seems to fix it. It's not something that I encourage him to do. I just ignore it and, send him forward and go into a little shoulder four or a leg yield. With my position, I need to be bringing my shoulders back. I tend to lean forward with my shoulders. I'm constantly reminding myself to bring my head and neck back along with my shoulders. I think it's very easy to start that habit to fall forward, especially in this work when you tend to want to look at the horse's head and neck position. Definitely a fault of mine. I need to remember that I can just feel it. I don't need to look at it. We leg yield here. As he comes around here, I think he sees a deer. He loses focus a little bit, so just send him forward. Another leg yield, we come down here. When he gets closer, you can see that he's really developing more of a top neck muscle than he had in that short clip from last year. He's starting to develop that muscle in his abdominals as well. He still has that dip behind the saddle, but it's slowly going away. It certainly isn't pronounced as it was last year. Next is a short clip from last year, our trotting. This is before Art2Ride. You could see he's not even tracking up. I actually have my hands flipped over with my palms up just because any kind of contact I would accidentally create when my hands were the right way, he would just close that throat latch and bring his nose to his chest. It was so hard to not have him do that. It was just so easy for him to break over at the neck. So big difference here. Still has that tendency to want to curl behind. But when he does that, I just try to send him forward. The higher I lift my hand and give with my arms, the better I can correct that. You can see how much longer his top line looks compared to last year. I could be stretching up and back more, which would be helping him to stretch down. But I do think he has nice rhythm. Overall, I'm very proud of him. I think he's come a long way in just those 9 months. Yes, we still have a lot of work to do, but it's been a lot of fun teaching him. He really is a very fun horse to ride. Between his silly quirks and the amount of effort he gives me every time I'm on him, he always makes me smile. I've really been enjoying him, and I think our relationship has gotten much better with this work. He's much more happier now. Likes to come out of the pasture, get groomed, get ridden. There's just a big difference in his attitude. Next, I have a very short clip of us starting Piaffe. We're both experimenting with it. So what you see is where we're at so far. I had just started Piaffe work in August and clinicked with Will in September. He gave me a few pointers, and then this is what we've developed by November. Again, this is Marnie and Charlie. Thanks for watching.